You think you know what royal scandal looks like? Tomorrow you could discover that ancient Persian kings required their wives to undergo public examinations before marriage, that court officials documented every intimate detail of royal relationships, and that breaking certain bedroom protocols could result in execution by molten gold. Ancient Persia didn't just have royal marriages. They created a system of intimate surveillance so invasive it would make modern paparazzi look like amateur photographers. Welcome to the hidden world of Persian royal court secrets, where every private moment between kings and queens became public spectacle. I've spent months digging through cuneiform tablets, archaeological evidence from Persepolis, and Byzantine court records that most historians avoid discussing. What I've discovered will fundamentally change how you view ancient royalty and make you grateful that your relationship drama stays off clay tablets. Here's what most people don't realize about ancient Persian royal marriages. We're about to journey through 7 levels of intimate court horror that escalated throughout Persian history. From marriage ceremonies that required physical verification by priests to bedroom protocols enforced by armed guards. We'll expose how Persian kings turned conception into mathematical science, and why royal women faced execution for private conversations with men. You'll discover the brutal inspection rituals that determined royal legitimacy, and learn about the poison testing procedures that made every meal a potential death sentence. But wait, it gets worse. All of this insanity was literally carved into palace walls as official court policy. Let's start with the most humiliating requirement that governed every Persian royal marriage. King Darius stood outside his bride's chamber, but he wasn't alone. 12 Zoroastrian priests, the royal physician, 3 court scribes, and his own mother crowded into the ornate room overlooking the marriage bed. Princess Atassa, daughter of Cyrus the Great, lay beneath silk covers knowing that her value as a queen depended entirely on what happened next. This wasn't romance. This was a state inspection where failure meant annulment, exile, or death. The Persian Empire didn't just arrange royal marriages. They weaponized them into tools of political control, where every intimate detail became matters of imperial security. The verification ceremony wasn't some barbaric tradition from Persia's nomadic past. It was sophisticated statecraft designed to ensure legitimate heirs and prevent succession crises that could shatter the empire. Here's what most people don't understand about Persian royal marriage protocols. They weren't based on love, attraction, or even political alliance. They were calculated genetic experiments designed to produce perfect rulers. Persian kings believed that royal blood carried divine essence from Ahura Mazda himself. Mixing this sacred bloodline with impure influences could curse entire dynasties. The pre-marriage examination process began months before the wedding ceremony. Royal brides underwent medical inspections that would horrify modern audiences. Court physicians would examine every aspect of their physical condition, looking for signs of disease, deformity, or previous intimate contact. The examinations were conducted in marble chambers beneath the palace, where the walls still echo with centuries of humiliation. But physical inspection was just the beginning. Persian court astrologers calculated optimal conception dates based on planetary alignments. They believed that children conceived during certain celestial configurations would inherit divine authority. Other alignments would produce weak, cursed, or rebellious heirs. Royal couples weren't allowed intimate contact until the stars aligned perfectly. The astronomical calculations were incredibly complex. Court records from Persepolis showed detailed charts tracking Venus, Mars, and Jupiter positions. When all 3 planets aligned in specific constellations, the royal couple had exactly 7 days to conceive an heir. Miss this window, and they'd wait months for the next opportunity. The pressure on royal women to conceive during these brief periods was enormous. Princess Roxana's marriage to Alexander during his conquest of Persia provides the most detailed surviving account of these ceremonies. According to court historians, Roxana underwent examination by Persian priests who needed to verify her purity before allowing the union. The examination lasted 3 days and involved procedures that modern medicine would consider assault. The verification chamber was a specially designed room in the palace complex. Archaeological evidence shows these chambers had raised platforms where examinations took place, drainage systems for ritual purification, and viewing galleries where court officials could observe proceedings. The walls were decorated with fertility symbols and inscriptions asking Ahura Mazda to bless the union with strong sons. But here's where Persian marriage protocols get truly disturbing. The examination wasn't just medical, it was magical. Zoroastrian priests believed they could determine a woman's spiritual purity through physical inspection. They looked for signs of demonic influence, evidence of sorcery, or marks indicating she'd been cursed by enemies. Any unusual birthmark, scar, or physical variation could be interpreted as spiritual contamination. The religious justification for these inspections reveals the twisted theology underlying Persian royal marriages. Zoroastrian doctrine taught that Ahura Mazda created perfect human forms. Any deviation from this perfection indicated corruption by Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. Royal women had to embody physical and spiritual perfection to serve as vessels for divine bloodlines. Court records describe specific criteria used during examinations. Symmetrical features indicated divine favor. Certain eye colors suggested supernatural wisdom. Specific body proportions revealed compatibility with royal essence. The priests had detailed charts correlating physical characteristics with spiritual qualities. They were essentially creating genetic profiles using religious pseudoscience. The examination results determined not just marriage approval, but the woman's entire future role in court. Those deemed perfectly pure became primary wives with succession rights. Women with minor imperfections became secondary wives for political alliances. Those failing examination faced immediate exile or death, depending on the nature of their disqualification. Persian kings could have multiple wives, but only the primary wife could produce legitimate heirs. This created a hierarchy of royal women based on their examination scores. The primary wife lived in the most luxurious quarters, attended state ceremonies, and wielded significant political influence. Secondary wives lived in separate compounds, rarely saw the king, and served primarily as hostages ensuring their family's loyalty. The competition between royal wives was intense and often deadly. Court records document numerous cases of poisoning, sabotage, and assassination attempts between women competing for the king's attention. The primary wife position wasn't permanent. A secondary wife who proved more fertile or politically valuable could be elevated, while the former primary wife faced demotion or elimination. The succession implications of these marriage protocols shaped Persian imperial policy for centuries. Legitimate heirs required proper conception during astrologically favorable periods by verified pure wives. Illegitimate children, regardless of their abilities, couldn't inherit the throne. This system created succession crises when legitimate heirs died young or proved incompetent. King Cambyses II's succession illustrates the devastating consequences of these marriage rules. His father Cyrus the Great had multiple sons, but only Cambyses qualified as legitimate heir based on his mother's verification status and his conception timing. When Cambyses proved mentally unstable and possibly insane, the empire had no legal alternative successor. The resulting chaos nearly destroyed the Persian Empire. The psychological damage inflicted on royal women through these examination protocols cannot be overstated. Modern analysis of court records reveals high rates of suicide, self-harm, and mental breakdown among Persian royal wives. They lived in constant fear of losing their status, being replaced by younger rivals, or failing to conceive during the narrow windows of astronomical opportunity. The palace quarters designed for royal wives resembled prisons more than luxurious residences. High walls prevented escape. Guards monitored every movement. All food was tested for poison. Conversations were recorded by court scribes. Even private religious prayers were monitored for signs of disloyalty or inappropriate requests to competing deities. Persian royal women developed elaborate coping mechanisms to survive this psychological torture. They created secret languages using hand gestures and clothing arrangements to communicate without detection. They formed alliances with sympathetic court officials who could provide warnings about threats. Some even arranged their own deaths rather than face the humiliation of public examination failure. The verification ceremonies became increasingly elaborate over time as Persian kings competed to demonstrate their piety and attention to detail. What began as simple medical examinations evolved into multi-day religious festivals involving hundreds of participants. The ceremonies included animal sacrifices, astronomical observations, magical rituals, and public demonstrations of the bride's qualifications. But physical verification was just the foundation of Persian court control over royal relationships. Once marriage was approved and consummated, the real surveillance began. Persian kings didn't trust their wives to maintain loyalty, purity, or discretion without constant monitoring. Every aspect of royal married life became subject to official oversight that makes modern government surveillance look like casual observation. The bedroom protocols that governed royal intimate life were so detailed and invasive that they required specialized court positions to enforce them. Palace records describe officials whose sole responsibility was monitoring royal couples' private activities, documenting their conversations, and ensuring compliance with religious and political requirements. These intimate overseers weren't just guards or servants. They were trained specialists who understood Zoroastrian theology, Persian law, astronomical timing, and court politics. They knew which activities were permitted during specific religious festivals, which positions were considered spiritually pure, and which conversations could be interpreted as treasonous. They were essentially intimate thought police with the power to destroy royal marriages through their reports. But even this level of surveillance wasn't the most invasive aspect of Persian royal relationships. The empire had developed methods of control so sophisticated and cruel that they turned marriage itself into a weapon of state power. What happened when royal wives failed to meet the impossible standards set by court protocol makes everything we've discussed so far look like gentle courtship rituals. The Persian Empire's approach to royal marriage control was about to become something far more sinister than simple verification ceremonies or bedroom monitoring. They were preparing to transform love itself into an instrument of terror that would haunt royal couples for generations. The poison tasters weren't just servants protecting the king from assassination attempts. They were instruments of psychological warfare designed to terrorize royal wives into absolute submission. Every meal Princess Statera ate was first consumed by 3 different tasters, each specializing in detecting specific types of poison. But here's what makes this truly insidious. The tasters weren't just testing for external threats. They were monitoring what the royal wives were eating to ensure they weren't secretly preventing pregnancy. Persian court physicians had identified dozens of plants and substances that could prevent conception or cause miscarriage. Royal wives caught consuming any of these materials faced execution by molten gold, a death so horrific that even hardened Persian soldiers would look away. The poison tasters weren't protecting the queens. They were ensuring the queens couldn't protect themselves from unwanted pregnancies. The sophistication of Persian contraceptive detection was centuries ahead of its time. Court physicians maintained detailed catalogs of every plant, mineral, and animal product that could affect fertility. They knew that certain combinations of herbs could prevent implantation. They understood that specific mushrooms could terminate early pregnancies. They even recognized that emotional stress could disrupt conception, which is why royal wives lived in constant terror. Queen Parysatis, wife of Darius II, provides the most documented case of contraceptive persecution in Persian court records. Palace physicians discovered traces of silphium in her food, a plant known throughout the ancient world for its contraceptive properties. Silphium was worth more than gold specifically because it could prevent pregnancy without obvious symptoms. Finding it in the queen's diet was considered proof of deliberate fertility sabotage. The interrogation methods used to extract confessions from accused royal wives were designed to break both body and spirit. Parysatis was suspended by her wrists in the palace dungeon, while court officials demanded she name her accomplices. Who had provided the silphium? Which servants had helped prepare it? What other royal wives were involved in the conspiracy? The questioning continued for weeks until she confessed to crimes that may never have occurred. But contraceptive persecution was just one weapon in the Persian arsenal of marital control. The empire had developed an entire science of reproductive surveillance that monitored every aspect of royal women's biology. Court physicians tracked menstrual cycles with mathematical precision, recorded the timing of every intimate encounter, and calculated conception probabilities based on lunar phases and seasonal variations. The menstrual monitoring system reveals the clinical cruelty of Persian royal marriage protocols. Royal wives were required to report to court physicians immediately when their monthly cycle began. The physicians would examine them to verify the report's accuracy, document the flow's characteristics, and calculate optimal conception windows for the following month. Missing a report or providing false information carried penalties ranging from public humiliation to execution. The astronomical conception calendar governed when royal couples could attempt to produce heirs. Persian astrologers had identified specific planetary alignments that supposedly produced superior children. Mars ascending in certain constellations would create military geniuses. Jupiter aligned with Venus would produce wise administrators. Mercury in the house of the sun would generate diplomatic masterminds. Royal couples had to time their intimate activities to these celestial schedules regardless of personal desire or physical readiness. The pressure created by astronomical timing requirements drove many royal wives to psychological collapse. They had narrow windows of opportunity to conceive, sometimes only 3 or 4 days per month when the stars aligned favorably. Miss these windows, and they'd wait months for another chance while facing constant criticism for their failure to produce heirs. The stress often made conception even more difficult, creating cycles of frustration and desperation. King Artaxerxes III's marriage to Princess Andia illustrates the devastating consequences of astronomical conception requirements. Court astrologers calculated that their first child needed to be conceived during a specific Mars-Jupiter conjunction that occurred only once every 2 years. When Andia failed to conceive during the designated period, she faced accusations of deliberately sabotaging the royal succession. The psychological pressure led to a complete mental breakdown that left her unable to function as queen. The court's response to Andia's breakdown reveals the Persian Empire's complete disregard for royal women's humanity. Rather than providing support or medical treatment, court officials declared her spiritually corrupted and unsuitable for royal marriage. She was confined to a tower prison where she lived in isolation for the remaining 15 years of her life. Forgotten by the court and forbidden from any human contact except minimal food delivery. But astronomical timing was only part of the Persian system for controlling royal reproduction. The empire had developed position regulations that dictated exactly how royal couples could engage in intimate activities. These weren't suggestions or religious guidelines. They were legally enforced requirements with specific penalties for violations. Court officials actually monitored royal bedrooms to ensure compliance with approved positions and techniques. The position monitoring system operated through a network of specially trained palace servants who could observe royal couples without being detected. Hidden viewing chambers were built into palace walls, allowing court officials to watch royal bedrooms through concealed openings. The observers would document everything they witnessed, creating detailed reports that were reviewed by senior court officials and stored in palace archives. The approved position regulations were based on Zoroastrian religious doctrine combined with Persian theories about conception and child development. Certain positions were believed to produce male heirs. Others supposedly created female children. Some positions were thought to transfer specific character traits to the resulting offspring. Royal couples were required to use only approved positions during their designated conception windows. The penalties for position violations were swift and brutal. King Xerxes I ordered the execution of his secondary wife Artante after court observers reported she had initiated intimate contact in an unauthorized position. The violation was considered evidence of spiritual corruption that could contaminate the royal bloodline. Artante was strangled with silk cords in her own bedroom while her children watched, a warning to other royal wives about the consequences of breaking position protocols. The psychological impact of constant bedroom surveillance created a generation of royal women who couldn't function normally in intimate relationships. They developed severe anxiety disorders, sexual dysfunction, and paranoid behaviors that affected every aspect of their lives. Many royal wives reported feeling like they were performing for an audience, rather than sharing intimate moments with their husbands. The surveillance technology developed by Persian courts was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Palace architects designed viewing chambers with acoustic properties that amplified sound from royal bedrooms. They created mirror systems that reflected images from multiple angles. They even developed primitive recording methods using trained scribes who could document conversations and activities in real time. The conversation monitoring aspect of Persian royal surveillance was perhaps the most invasive element of the entire system. Royal wives weren't allowed private conversations with anyone, including their own children, without court observers present. Every word was recorded, analyzed for treasonous content, and filed in palace archives. The accumulated records from centuries of conversation monitoring filled entire libraries beneath Persian palaces. The topics forbidden in royal conversations reveal the paranoia underlying Persian court culture. Royal wives couldn't discuss politics, military affairs, succession issues, religious questions, personal relationships, or even their own health without permission. They couldn't express opinions about court policies, comment on other royal family members, or share memories of their lives before marriage. The conversational restrictions effectively eliminated their ability to form meaningful relationships with anyone. The enforcement mechanisms for conversation monitoring were designed to encourage self-censorship through terror. Royal wives never knew which servants were actually court spies reporting their words to officials. They couldn't trust their own children, who might innocently repeat overheard conversations to the wrong people. The uncertainty created an atmosphere of constant paranoia, where royal wives learned to communicate primarily through approved phrases and meaningless pleasantries. But conversation monitoring was just the foundation for an even more invasive system of psychological control. Persian courts had developed methods for manipulating royal women's thoughts and emotions that make modern brainwashing techniques look primitive. The empire understood that controlling behavior wasn't enough. They needed to control the very thoughts and feelings that motivated behavior. The psychological manipulation began with systematic isolation, designed to make royal wives completely dependent on court approval for any human contact. They were separated from their families immediately after marriage and forbidden from maintaining relationships with anyone from their previous lives. Their children were raised by court appointees who taught them to view their mothers as potential threats to imperial security. The isolation was combined with carefully controlled information designed to distort royal wives' understanding of reality. They received news about the outside world only through court-approved sources that emphasized the empire's power and their own vulnerability. They were told exaggerated stories about the fates of disobedient royal wives, creating a climate of fear that made resistance seem hopeless. The Persian system of royal marriage control had transformed intimate relationships into instruments of imperial policy. What started as verification ceremonies had evolved into comprehensive systems for monitoring, controlling, and manipulating every aspect of royal women's lives. But the empire wasn't finished. They were about to implement the most devastating weapon in their arsenal of marital control. A practice so cruel it would make everything we've discussed seem like gentle courtship by comparison. The succession manipulation protocols represented the darkest evolution of Persian royal marriage control. When Queen Atassa gave birth to her third son, she had no idea that court officials had already decided which of her children would live to see their fifth birthday. The Persian Empire didn't just control royal marriages and monitor intimate relationships. They orchestrated elaborate schemes to eliminate inconvenient heirs while making their deaths appear natural. The heir elimination system operated through a sophisticated network of palace physicians, food preparers, and nursery attendants who could cause infant deaths without leaving obvious evidence. Court records describe specific methods for inducing fatal illnesses that mimicked common childhood diseases. Royal children who posed succession threats would develop mysterious fevers, breathing difficulties, or digestive problems that proved invariably fatal despite the best medical attention. The selection criteria for heir elimination were coldly calculated based on political necessity rather than natural inheritance rights. Firstborn sons weren't automatically safe if their mothers had fallen from favor. Children born during astrologically unfavorable periods faced elimination regardless of their health or intelligence. Even legitimate heirs could be targeted if their survival threatened the empire's stability or contradicted the king's political plans. Princess Mandane's children provide the most documented case of systematic heir elimination in Persian court records. She had given birth to 4 sons over 6 years, but court astrologers determined that only one should survive to prevent future succession disputes. Within 18 months, 3 of her sons had died from apparent natural causes. Palace physicians recorded detailed symptoms for each death, creating medical explanations that satisfied superficial investigation while concealing the deliberate poisoning. The psychological warfare inflicted on royal mothers through heir elimination was perhaps the cruelest aspect of the entire system. They were forced to watch their children die while knowing that court officials were responsible, but being unable to prove it or seek justice. The mothers couldn't even grieve openly, as excessive mourning was interpreted as criticism of divine will and imperial wisdom. The poison delivery methods developed by Persian court assassins were masterpieces of undetectable murder. They used substances that occurred naturally in certain foods, making poisoning appear accidental. They developed delayed action toxins that took weeks to kill, allowing time for the poisoner to establish alibis. They even created poisons that mimicked specific diseases, complete with predictable symptom progressions that convinced court physicians of natural causes. The training program for court assassins reveals the industrial scale of Persian heir elimination operations. Specialized schools taught anatomy, toxicology, and acting skills necessary for successful poisoning missions. Students learned to identify political targets, select appropriate poisons, and maintain cover identities while carrying out elimination orders. The curriculum included methods for poisoning adults, children, and even pregnant women without detection. But heir elimination was only one component of Persian succession manipulation. The empire had developed even more sophisticated methods for ensuring that only politically acceptable children inherited royal power. They could manipulate conception timing to influence children's personalities, control childhood education to shape their beliefs, and arrange marriages that would neutralize potential threats from ambitious heirs. The personality manipulation protocols were based on Persian theories about how conception timing affected character development. Children conceived during specific astrological periods supposedly inherited predetermined personality traits. Court astrologers could calculate when to conceive children who would be naturally submissive, intellectually limited, or emotionally unstable. The empire essentially bred incompetent heirs who could be easily controlled by court officials. King Darius III's succession illustrates the devastating long-term consequences of personality manipulation breeding. His grandfather had been conceived during an astrological period that supposedly produced weak-willed rulers. His father inherited the same submissive tendencies. By the time Darius III inherited the throne, the royal bloodline had been so weakened through deliberate breeding that he couldn't effectively resist Alexander's invasion. The Persian Empire's own succession manipulation protocols had created the incompetent leadership that facilitated its destruction. The childhood education control system ensured that even naturally intelligent royal children were raised to serve court interests rather than developing independent thinking abilities. Royal tutors were actually court agents who shaped children's understanding of history, politics, and their own roles in imperial governance. The children learned modified versions of Persian history that emphasized obedience to court officials rather than independent royal authority. The educational manipulation began in infancy through carefully controlled exposure to information and experiences. Royal children were isolated from alternative viewpoints, surrounded by court appointees who reinforced approved beliefs, and punished for showing curiosity about forbidden topics. The psychological conditioning was so thorough that most royal children grew up genuinely believing that court officials knew better than they did about governing the empire. The marriage arrangement system provided the final layer of succession control by ensuring that royal heirs married spouses who would either support court interests or prove unable to produce viable heirs themselves. Court officials arranged marriages with foreign princesses who had no local power base, noble daughters whose families depended on court favor, or women who had been secretly sterilized to prevent them from producing competing heirs. Princess Roxana's marriage arrangement reveals the cynical calculation behind Persian royal wedding politics. Court officials selected her specifically because her foreign background made her completely dependent on their support for survival in Persian court culture. They knew she would never develop the political connections necessary to challenge their authority or protect her children from elimination if they posed succession threats. The sterilization procedures used on selected royal wives were performed by court physicians under the pretense of treating minor medical conditions. Women chosen for these procedures were usually secondary wives, whose primary function was diplomatic rather than reproductive. The operations were conducted secretly, and the women often didn't realize they had been sterilized until years of failed conception attempts revealed the truth. The foreign princess trafficking system operated as a sophisticated international kidnapping network disguised as diplomatic marriage negotiations. Persian ambassadors would identify attractive young women in conquered territories and arrange their transport to Persian courts under false pretenses. The women believed they were being honored with royal marriages, but they were actually being collected as disposable courtesans for the king's entertainment. The trafficking victims faced horrific treatment that violated every principle of diplomatic immunity and royal courtesy. They were subjected to the same verification examinations as legitimate royal wives, but their foreign status meant they had no family protection or legal recourse if they were abused. Many were used temporarily for the king's pleasure and then discarded through arranged accidents or sudden illnesses. The diplomatic cover system allowed Persian courts to traffic women internationally without consequences. Foreign governments couldn't protest the treatment of their daughters without risking military retaliation from the Persian Empire. The women's families were told their daughters had died in accidents or from diseases, preventing them from investigating the truth or demanding justice. The scale of foreign princess trafficking was enormous and systematic. Persian records document hundreds of young women transported from conquered territories specifically for royal entertainment purposes. The operation required extensive logistics, including transportation networks, safe houses, forged documentation, and corrupt officials in multiple countries. It was essentially an ancient international sex trafficking ring operating under diplomatic protection. But the trafficking system was just one aspect of Persian court entertainment culture that turned royal relationships into spectacles for the king's amusement. The empire had developed increasingly elaborate methods for extracting entertainment value from human suffering, particularly the suffering of royal women who had lost favor or failed to meet court expectations. The public humiliation ceremonies for disgraced royal wives were designed to provide entertainment, while serving as warnings to other women about the consequences of disobedience. These weren't simple executions or exile orders. They were carefully choreographed performances that could last for days and involved the participation of hundreds of court officials, servants, and spectators. The humiliation ceremonies began with elaborate preparation rituals that stripped away every symbol of the woman's former status and dignity. Her royal clothing was removed piece by piece in public, while court officials read accusations detailing her supposed crimes against the empire. Her jewelry was redistributed to loyal wives as rewards for their obedience. Even her hair was cut off and burned as a symbol of her spiritual contamination. The public degradation phase involved forcing disgraced royal wives to perform menial tasks while being mocked by court spectators. They might be required to clean palace floors, serve food to their former servants, or perform dances that emphasized their fallen status. The activities were designed to be both physically exhausting and psychologically devastating, breaking down any remaining sense of dignity or self-worth. The creative cruelty displayed during these ceremonies reveals the sadistic entertainment culture that had developed within Persian courts. Officials competed to devise new forms of humiliation that would provide maximum amusement while avoiding quick death that would end the spectacle too soon. The goal was to extract maximum entertainment value from each disgraced woman before finally disposing of her. The audience participation aspect of humiliation ceremonies created a collaborative atmosphere where court officials could demonstrate their loyalty by contributing to the entertainment. They would suggest new humiliations, provide props for degrading performances, or offer commentary that enhanced the spectacle's entertainment value. The ceremonies became social events that strengthened bonds between court officials through shared participation in cruelty. The documentation requirements for humiliation ceremonies show how thoroughly the Persian Empire bureaucratized even their entertainment practices. Court scribes recorded every detail of the proceedings, creating permanent records of each woman's degradation that could be referenced for future ceremonies. The records served both as entertainment for later reading and as instructional materials for officials planning similar events. The psychological research conducted during these ceremonies provided valuable information about human breaking points that court officials used to refine their control methods. They studied how different types of humiliation affected women's behavior, which techniques most effectively destroyed resistance, and how long human beings could endure specific forms of degradation before complete psychological collapse. But humiliation ceremonies were just the public face of Persian court entertainment culture. Behind palace walls, the empire had developed even more sophisticated methods for extracting amusement from human suffering. The private entertainment systems created for royal pleasure would make the public ceremonies seem almost merciful by comparison. The living art installations created from former royal wives represent perhaps the most creative cruelty in Persian court entertainment history. Women who had lost favor weren't simply executed or exiled. They were transformed into decorative objects that provided ongoing entertainment through their continued existence in degraded states. Human furniture was the most common form of living art installation. Former royal wives would be positioned as tables, chairs, or decorative stands during court banquets and ceremonies. They were required to maintain perfect stillness for hours while courtiers ate, drank, and conducted business around them. The psychological torture of being treated as an object rather than a human being was considered more entertaining than simple physical punishment. The positioning requirements for human furniture were designed to maximize both the entertainment value and the physical discomfort of the women involved. They might be required to support heavy objects on their backs for entire ceremonies, hold awkward positions that caused muscle cramps and joint pain, or remain motionless while court officials deliberately spilled food and drink on them during meals. The competitive aspect of human furniture arrangements turned the installations into ongoing entertainment, as court officials tried to devise increasingly creative ways to use former royal wives as decorative objects. They competed to see who could design the most humiliating positions, create the most uncomfortable arrangements, or find new ways to incorporate the women into court ceremonies as functional rather than ornamental elements. The maintenance requirements for living art installations created an entire support industry within Persian courts. Specialized servants were assigned to keep the installations in proper condition, ensuring that the women remained healthy enough to serve their decorative functions while being kept in sufficiently degraded states to provide ongoing entertainment value. The rotation schedules for human furniture prevented any individual woman from becoming too familiar or boring as an entertainment source. Different former royal wives would be assigned to furniture duty on different days, creating variety in the court's decorative arrangements while ensuring that all disgraced women participated in their own ongoing humiliation. But living art installations were just one category of Persian court entertainment derived from human suffering. The empire had developed an entire catalog of creative punishments that provided ongoing amusement while serving as constant reminders to other royal wives about the consequences of losing favor. The Persian Empire's approach to royal marriage control had evolved far beyond simple surveillance and intimidation. They had created comprehensive systems for extracting entertainment value from human suffering while maintaining the pretense of religious and political necessity. The empire had transformed cruelty into art, suffering into entertainment, and human degradation into state policy. The court officials who administered these systems weren't simply following orders or maintaining traditions. They were innovating constantly, developing new methods for controlling royal relationships and extracting amusement from human misery. The Persian court had become a laboratory for studying human psychology through applied torture disguised as imperial governance. But the entertainment systems were just the foundation for an even more sinister aspect of Persian royal marriage control. The empire was about to implement practices so devastating that they would make everything we've discussed seem like gentle courtship rituals. The final revelation about Persian court secrets involves methods of control so complete and horrifying that they challenge the very concept of human identity itself. The identity erasure protocols represented the most complete form of human destruction ever devised by Persian courts. When Queen Apama was caught speaking her native language to a servant, court officials didn't simply punish her. They systematically erased every trace of her previous existence, transforming her into a blank slate that could be reprogrammed according to imperial requirements. The Persian Empire had perfected techniques for destroying human identity so completely that victims forgot their own names, families, and entire life histories. The memory destruction process began with chemical intervention, using substances derived from exotic plants imported from the far reaches of the empire. Court physicians had discovered that certain combinations of mushrooms, tree bark, and mineral compounds could selectively damage specific areas of the brain responsible for long-term memory formation. The treatments were administered gradually over months, allowing officials to control exactly which memories were destroyed while preserving basic functions necessary for survival. The dosage calculations for memory destruction required mathematical precision that reveals the scientific sophistication underlying Persian cruelty. Too little of the chemical mixture would leave dangerous memories intact. Too much would cause complete mental collapse or death. Court physicians maintained detailed charts correlating body weight, age, and mental resistance with optimal dosing schedules for achieving perfect memory erasure without killing the subject. Queen Apama's treatment log provides horrifying insight into the systematic nature of identity destruction. Palace records document her daily chemical doses, weekly memory assessments, and gradual progression from an intelligent royal wife to a confused shell of her former self. Within 6 months, she couldn't remember her own children's names. After a year, she had no recollection of ever being married or living anywhere other than the palace servant quarters. The memory replacement protocols filled the emptiness left by destroyed recollections with carefully constructed false histories designed to serve imperial purposes. Court officials would spend weeks programming new identities into their victims' damaged minds, creating elaborate fictional backgrounds that explained their presence in the palace while eliminating any connection to their previous lives or loyalties. The false identity construction was remarkably sophisticated, involving detailed backstories that could withstand casual questioning while serving imperial control objectives. Former royal wives might be convinced they were rescued slaves, grateful for imperial protection, reformed criminals seeking redemption through service, or foreign refugees whose families had been killed by enemies of Persia. The false identities were designed to create absolute loyalty through manufactured gratitude. The programming sessions used repetition, emotional manipulation, and carefully controlled environmental cues to implant false memories into chemically damaged brains. Victims would be told their fictional histories hundreds of times while under the influence of mind-altering substances that made them more susceptible to suggestion. The programming continued until they genuinely believed the false identities were their true memories. The quality control testing for false identity implantation involved elaborate deception scenarios designed to verify that memory replacement had been successful. Court officials would stage fake reunions with actors pretending to be family members from the victim's false history, testing whether they responded appropriately to the manufactured relationships. Victims who showed any recognition of their true identities faced additional chemical treatments until all authentic memories were eliminated. The identity verification ceremonies marked the completion of memory destruction by formally recognizing the victim's new false identity as their official court status. Former royal wives who had been completely reprogrammed would be presented to the king as new servants whose gratitude and loyalty had been earned through imperial mercy, rather than chemical manipulation and psychological torture. But memory destruction was just one component of Persian identity erasure protocols. The empire had developed even more comprehensive methods for transforming human beings into completely different people who served imperial purposes while remaining unaware of their previous existence or the crimes committed against them. The personality reconstruction procedures targeted not just memories, but the fundamental character traits that defined individual identity. Court physicians had identified specific brain regions responsible for courage, intelligence, creativity, and independence. They developed surgical techniques for damaging these areas precisely enough to eliminate dangerous personality traits while preserving basic functionality necessary for serving imperial purposes. The surgical instruments used for personality reconstruction were crafted by the empire's finest metalworkers, specifically for brain modification procedures. Thin probes could be inserted through the skull to damage specific neural pathways. Heated wires could cauterize brain tissue with surgical precision. Even primitive drilling equipment allowed court physicians to access deep brain structures for targeted destruction. The personality modification surgeries were performed without anesthesia because court physicians needed victims to remain conscious during the procedures to test the effectiveness of their interventions. They would engage subjects in conversation while systematically destroying different brain regions, monitoring how each modification affected speech, reasoning, and emotional responses. The victims experienced every moment of their personality being surgically dismantled. The target personality profiles were designed to create perfect servants who possessed exactly the mental capabilities required for their assigned roles while lacking any traits that might lead to resistance or independent thinking. Former royal wives might be modified to become skilled artisans who could create beautiful objects while being incapable of planning escape attempts or forming emotional attachments to other people. The personality testing protocols evaluated the success of brain modification surgeries through elaborate behavioral assessments designed to reveal any remaining traces of dangerous independence or intelligence. Modified subjects would be placed in situations that tested their loyalty, creativity, problem-solving abilities, and emotional responses. Those who showed excessive intelligence or independence faced additional surgical interventions. The maintenance procedures for modified personalities required ongoing chemical treatments to prevent the brain from healing or developing new neural pathways that might restore dangerous capabilities. Court physicians administered regular doses of substances that prevented neural regeneration while preserving the artificially created personality traits that served imperial purposes. The quality assurance system for personality reconstruction involved long-term monitoring to ensure that modified subjects remained stable and useful over time. Court officials tracked the behavior of surgically altered individuals for years, documenting any changes in their capabilities or loyalty that might indicate the need for additional interventions or disposal through arranged accidents. But personality reconstruction was still just one aspect of Persian identity erasure technology. The empire had developed the ultimate form of human transformation that went beyond simply modifying memory and personality to create entirely new human beings from the raw material of former royal wives who had outlived their usefulness. The complete identity replacement protocols represented the pinnacle of Persian psychological engineering, combining memory destruction, personality reconstruction, and physical modification into comprehensive transformation procedures that created entirely new human beings with no connection to their previous existence. The process was so thorough that victims didn't just forget who they had been, they became fundamentally different people at every conceivable level. The physical modification procedures began the transformation process by altering the victim's appearance beyond recognition through surgical techniques that would be considered advanced even by modern standards. Court physicians could reshape facial features, modify body proportions, and even change skin tone through chemical treatments that permanently altered pigmentation. The physical changes ensured that no one could recognize the transformed individual as their former self. The voice modification techniques used controlled damage to vocal cords and throat structures to completely change how subjects sounded when speaking. Court physicians had discovered that specific types of scarring could raise or lower vocal pitch, alter speech patterns, and even change accents in ways that made former royal wives sound like completely different people. The voice changes were permanent and irreversible. The mannerism replacement training taught transformed subjects entirely new ways of moving, gesturing, and interacting with others that bore no resemblance to their previous behavioral patterns. Court trainers would spend months drilling new movement patterns into surgically modified brains until the artificial behaviors became automatic responses that replaced all traces of their former physical habits. The language replacement protocols involved destroying the victim's ability to speak their native language while implanting fluency in different dialects or foreign tongues that served imperial purposes. The process required both chemical destruction of existing language centers in the brain and intensive training to build new linguistic capabilities from scratch. Former royal wives might be transformed into interpreters who could communicate with foreign diplomats while being incapable of remembering their own original languages. The skill implantation procedures used repetitive training combined with chemical enhancement to teach transformed subjects entirely new capabilities that their original personalities had never possessed. Court trainers could turn former royal wives into skilled craftswomen, talented musicians, or expert administrators through intensive programming that overwrote their previous abilities with completely different skill sets. The relationship programming established new emotional connections that replaced all previous human attachments with carefully constructed loyalties designed to serve imperial purposes. Transformed subjects would be convinced that they loved specific court officials, felt grateful to particular administrators, or harbored deep hatred for enemies of the empire. The artificial emotions were indistinguishable from genuine feelings to the subjects themselves. The background documentation created elaborate false histories that explained the presence of transformed individuals in court society while concealing any connection to their previous identities. Court scribes would forge years of records showing the new person's fictional background, complete with family histories, education records, and employment documentation that could withstand detailed investigation by suspicious officials. The integration ceremonies formally introduced transformed subjects into court society under their new identities, complete with witnesses who would swear to having known them for years under their false names. The ceremonies created social proof for the manufactured identities, while providing entertainment for court officials who enjoyed watching the successful completion of their psychological engineering projects. The success rate for complete identity replacement was remarkably high, with most subjects fully accepting their new identities within 2 years of beginning the transformation process. Court records indicate that less than 5% of transformed individuals ever showed any signs of remembering their previous existence, and those cases were quickly corrected through additional chemical treatments or surgical interventions. The long-term monitoring system tracked transformed subjects for decades to ensure they remained stable and useful, while gathering data about the effectiveness of different transformation techniques. Court officials maintained detailed files on every aspect of their artificial personalities, allowing them to refine their methods and develop even more sophisticated identity replacement procedures for future use. But the identity replacement protocols were just the most visible aspect of Persian court engineering. Behind the scenes, the empire had developed an entire industry dedicated to human transformation that processed hundreds of subjects annually through systematic procedures designed to convert inconvenient people into useful resources for imperial administration. The transformation facilities operated as secret installations within palace complexes, where the empire's most advanced psychological engineering took place away from public view. These weren't simple prisons or medical facilities. They were sophisticated laboratories equipped with specialized equipment for memory destruction, personality modification, physical alteration, and identity reconstruction on an industrial scale. The staffing requirements for transformation facilities included teams of specialists trained in different aspects of human modification. Chemical experts prepared the substances used for memory destruction. Surgeons performed personality reconstruction procedures. Trainers implanted new skills and behaviors. Guards maintained security while subjects underwent months of transformation procedures that required careful monitoring and adjustment. The supply chain management for human transformation required coordination between multiple court departments responsible for identifying subjects, transporting them to facilities, and disposing of waste products from unsuccessful procedures. The empire had developed efficient systems for processing large numbers of people through transformation protocols while maintaining the secrecy necessary to prevent public awareness of the operations. The research and development programs constantly worked to improve transformation techniques through experimentation on live subjects who served as test cases for new procedures. Court scientists would try different chemical combinations, surgical approaches, and training methods to develop more effective ways of destroying human identity and creating useful artificial personalities from the resulting psychological wreckage. The quality control standards ensured that transformed subjects met specific criteria for loyalty, capability, and stability before being released into court society under their new identities. Failed transformations were disposed of through methods that eliminated any evidence of the procedures while providing useful anatomical specimens for training future transformation specialists. The economic efficiency calculations showed that human transformation was far more cost-effective than simply executing inconvenient royal wives and recruiting new servants to replace them. The empire could convert political liabilities into valuable assets while extracting entertainment value from the transformation process itself and gathering scientific knowledge that improved their control methods. The international applications of transformation technology allowed Persian courts to convert captured foreign nobles into loyal Persian administrators who could govern conquered territories with intimate knowledge of local customs, while maintaining absolute loyalty to imperial interests. The transformed foreign nobles were essentially perfect spies who genuinely believed they were Persian patriots working to spread imperial civilization. The diplomatic immunity that protected transformation facilities made it impossible for foreign governments to investigate reports about missing nobles or diplomats who had disappeared during visits to Persian courts. The empire could kidnap anyone with diplomatic status and transform them into loyal Persian agents without facing any consequences from their home countries. The succession applications of transformation technology provided the ultimate solution to Persian royal inheritance problems by allowing court officials to transform inconvenient heirs into loyal servants while creating artificial princes from suitable raw material who could inherit the throne under manufactured identities that served imperial rather than dynastic interests. The Persian Empire had achieved something unprecedented in human history. They had developed comprehensive technology for destroying human identity and rebuilding it according to their specifications. They could take any person and transform them into anyone they needed while ensuring the subject remained completely unaware of the process. The empire had essentially solved the problem of human free will by eliminating it entirely, but even this ultimate form of control wasn't the end of Persian court innovation. The empire was about to implement systems so totalitarian they would make identity replacement seem like a minor inconvenience. The final phase of Persian royal marriage control would transform the very concept of human relationships into something unrecognizable to modern understanding.